Abba Shapiro is our presenter today. So welcome everybody. So glad you could join us. Abba is a fantastic photographer, videographer. He is our master trainer here at Skylum. So it's a real treat to have him showing you the basics of Luminar. So I want you just to sit back and relax and enjoy this presentation. Abba, thank you so much for hosting this webinar.
Well, it's my pleasure, and thank everybody for taking the time to join us. We're going to go over Luminar from the beginning. So if you have not used the application, it'll help you get your feet wet and have a better understanding of the workflow of how you can do things. We'll cover as much as we can in the time that we have. We do have additional webinars every month, and we record them all and we put them on our website. So you can always go back and watch this one or look at some of the other beginning webinars or even the more intermediate webinars that we've already done. Today, we're going to look at using Luminar to do a portrait. Sometimes we like to do landscape, sometimes we like to do architecture. This month, I thought I'd like to do a portrait, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to develop this image. And just to give you an idea of what we'll be going through, I'm going to hide the Luminar interface, and hopefully we'll see my desktop after that. So let me go ahead, Luminar, and I will just simply hide Luminar. So here we have on my desktop, this is just my Finder. These are kind of like the steps we'll go through to clean up this image in the bottom right. Which looks pretty nice out of the box, but I really want to tweak it. I really wanted to enhance it. And these are some of the steps. I'll actually be doing more steps that we'll be going through. Cleaning it up, maybe adding a little bit of a vignette, fixing the color temperature because it looks a little bit blue because of the daylight. I wanted to have that warm sunset feel. We'll then do something, and I'm calling it positive and negative structure, where we'll do smoothing to her face, but keep the detail in her hair. And then we'll look at some of the special features within Luminar. There's a great filter called the Accent AI filter. It stands for Artificial Intelligence, that can easily, with one slider, fix a lot of issues, brightening up an image, and fixing contrast, but it does it smart. It actually analyzes what's in the image and just doesn't do these bold changes. It actually adjusts them using this artificial intelligence. And then as we continue on, we'll look at removing the color cast. You can actually go through and do some of these things twice, and then learn about some of the other filters until we're all done, and even a little bit of cloning and stamping to remove some objects in the background and maybe do a little bit of skin cleaning. So that's what we're going to be covering today. And I have some pictures hidden down here in case we have some questions. I can quickly jump to those. But let me go back into Luminar. And I'm going to actually quit the application because we're going to start fresh. What we want to do is you can open up Luminar one of several ways. You can put a shortcut on your desktop. You can open it up from within your toolbar. And if you click open, you can open an image that way and dig through your files. I like to do it the easy way. I'm going to simply grab my original image and drop that image right onto the Luminar icon. It will now launch Luminar with that picture. Now, Luminar can work with a variety of picture formats. It can work with JPEG formats. It can work with PICT formats. It can open up TIFF files, 8 and 16-bit. It can also work with PNG files, Photoshop documents, and of course, RAW photos. So if you are shooting RAW, and I highly recommend shooting RAW if your camera does that, it will work with those natively and give you quite a bit of dynamic range to improve your images. Now, since I know we have people of all experience levels, some of you may not even are aware of the term RAW and what that means. We're not going to go into that. That's just a very uncompressed way of capturing your image. But however you capture your images, I want to work with your images, Luminar can open them up and work with them. And that's really should be your takeaway, that it's very, very flexible. So I've launched Luminar, and I've put this first image in. And let me walk you through the interface. There's 3 basic sections in the interface. There is, of course, the image that you're working with, and you can zoom in and zoom out on this image very easily. If you have with your mouse, you can simply scroll in and scroll out. But if you like drop-down menus, if you go to the upper left area of the screen, you'll see there's a little zoom thing that popped up. You can also zoom in with this little drop-down menu and this plus and minus. And that's really nice because sometimes when you want to fix an image, especially when you're doing a portrait, you really want to be able to zoom in and not see every flaw, but really be able to catch those little things that you might have wanted to fix. So let's go ahead and start processing this. So there's our image. You'll also notice there's a blank area to the right, and I'm going to get to that in just a moment. And there's a row of images on the bottom. And if I click on any of these images, these are presets. So when you buy Luminar, and it is an application you buy and you own, it's not a rental application. If you buy Luminar, it comes with a series of presets for quick fixes or quick stylizing of your images. So in this case, since the image actually is pretty good to start with, though we're going to make it even better, I could go through and say, you know what, I just want to make this look cool. And I'm going to go ahead and you'll notice along the top there's 5 presets and I have rows and rows of them. Luminar comes bundled with 8 preset packages. And then on our website, there are many more preset packages that you can download. And we do have some of our luminaries, some of these photographers we work with, famous photographers, that they do sell their looks. But you can keep adding these. And let's go ahead and explore what some of these presets can do. So for instance, this is a portrait. So I'm going to take a look at the portrait mode. I'm going to click on that. And you'll notice now that the bottom area is going to populate with 7 images. And if I like the look of one of these images, all I have to do is click on it. And once I click on it, it will apply that preset to this image. So this one's called Glamour. Now, the nice thing about Luminar is you're not stuck with a preset exactly as that preset is defined. Basically, it's not an on or off switch. If I like this, but I think maybe it's a little over the top, there's a slider here that says amount, and I could dial it back and blend it with the original image. So I think that's way too much, but I don't mind what it looks like at maybe 50 or 65%. Now, if I don't like the way that image looks, I can simply click on any other image. I just clicked on one called Noble Beauty. Gives me a nice black and white. And again, I could dial this back if I wanted to bring a little color into the image. So that's one part about the flexibility of the presets. But you'll notice once I clicked on one of these presets, that blank area that was over to the right side of the screen is no longer blank. It has been filled with various filters to create this look. And all of these filters have live sliders. And what that means is if I put this filter on and I only want to change one aspect of what it took to create it, such as I think the soft focus is a little too soft, I can pull that back. So I can modify any preset that's available to me from these drop-downs. So I could go ahead and maybe go to Black and White Fashion Magazine, and that's really a much harsher look. And if you look over here, I have my black and white part, soft focus, and I could say, let's bring the brightness down a little bit. Or I could go ahead and play with my black and white sliders. And we can go ahead and change the whole feel of the image to a look that I like. So think of these as a really great starting point for when you're editing your photos. Now, as I said, there are a variety of ones you can look at and use. For instance, I'm going to just show you a couple of these under Basic. These are just quick fixes. Maybe I like my image. I don't want to do anything fancy. Just want to, make it a little bit clearer. There's a clarity booster. And I click on that. It will apply the processes to give it a little bit of a sharper look. Or I like to maybe fix dark photos and it brings out that brightness. But what I want to point here is, if you look at the top, it's really nice to be able to look at your before and your after points in an image. So if you click on the little eyeball on the top center, that's your quick preview button. If you are a big keyboard junkie, you can use the backslash key. That's the one that's probably directly under the delete key on your keyboard. And I can toggle the before and the after. So I can very easily see the difference that one preset can make. Now, sometimes instead of turning it on and off, I like to be able to look at it side by side. And if you go over one to the next button, that's your compare button, and I click on that, and it allows me to look at my before and after as a side by side. And this is really useful when you're dealing with developing an image, because if you look at an image long enough, you're going to start seeing like these little nuanced flaws that you're trying to fix, and you often forget how far you've come with modifying or fixing your picture. So it's a real good practice to see what the before was and to look at the after and say, you know something, I'm 98% there. There's no reason to spend 5 hours for that last 2%. So that's one of the nice things about being able to see your before and your after. Let me go ahead and click that again and turn that off. Now that we're back with this image, I put on this preset, and you can see here that again, I have my live sliders that I can change, but I want to point something else out. For instance, if you look down at this second filter on the right, it says saturation and vibrance, and I can go, of course, play with these, and we'll look at these independently shortly, but I want you to look a little bit above and to the right. You'll see another eyeball, very similar to the eyeball that we saw earlier. Now, what this eyeball, or this preview button, allows me to do is toggle on and off just that one filter. So if I want to see what the effect of the saturation and vibrance filter did to my image, I can easily toggle that on and off. And you see, it very subtly has brought in a lot of color, or a little bit of color. I'm going to bring this all the way to the right so it's dramatic. Nobody would ever want their image to look like this. But this is the with it off and with it on. So that's really nice. It's very flexible. You can easily adjust things. You can see how a single filter might affect your image. I'm going to cover two things more with presets, and then we're going to actually start developing an image from scratch. One of the things I wanted to point out is if you find a preset that you like as a good starting point, and I actually did like that one. I'm going to go ahead, believe it or not, and let's look at soft and airy. No, we'll go back to fixed dark photos. So whenever you click on any of these, it will replace all of the filters with whatever filters were preset in these presets. But let's say I want to do something more. I like it, but I want to add a vignette. I want to add a filter. I can modify my presets not only by changing the sliders, I can add and take away different filters within a preset. And to do that, all you would need to do is go to the Add Filters button right here on the right side. It's a blue button, and that opens up a stack of over 50 filters that you can apply individually to your image. So I like this. I want to add a vignette. I look up here, and these groupings are broken down into, or these filters are broken down into different groupings. We have our essential filters, the ones you really start with, fixing your structure and developing your image and working with your vignettes and whatnot. There's also problem fixers. And if you keep scrolling down, we have creative filters. We have what we call professional filters. And the nice thing about Luminar is for a lot of folks who are just starting out with developing an image, they don't want to use some of these really odd advanced filters, such as something called HSL, which stands for hue, saturation, and luminance, or LUT mapping or curves. They're a little more complex at this point, but I want you to be aware that these filters are in here. So if you are coming from, say, Photoshop, and you've been using curves and HSL for years, these advanced filters are also available to you. So the nice thing about Luminar, it's as simple as you need it to be, but as powerful as you want it to be when you need it to be that powerful. So that's an idea of the different filters we have. I'm going to go back. I put on the curves filter. That was an accident. And the nice thing it was a happy accident, is that it allows me to show you how to remove a filter. All I have to do if there's a filter I don't want is hit the X button, and it goes away, and I'm back to the earlier state of my image. But I said I wanted to add a vignette, and the vignette I'm going to go ahead and throw on. I'll double click it, or I could drag it. And vignettes are used to help focus the viewer's eyes to the lightest part of the image. So we often put a vignette. I want it to focus more on her face and less on this blurred background. So I'll go ahead and I'm going to teach you a little trick that I use whenever I work with vignettes. If you go ahead and grab the amount slider and move that to the left, you get a darker vignette. Of course, you can go to a white vignette, but you'll get to a darker vignette, and then you can start positioning and changing the shape and whatnot. And that's how most instructors tell you to work with a vignette. What you should do, so you really know what's happening, is go ahead and bring it down so it's extreme, so you can really see the edges, and then grab the feather and bring that down. Now you can see really what the vignette is affecting in your image. So if I play with that roundness slider, I really see what's happening. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust the roundness. I can adjust my size. And then if I go down to the bottom part of that filter, there's a place center option. And if I click on place center, you'll notice something. It turns orange. And I want to point out this little visual reinforcement here. Anytime you see something that is orange means that filter or that setting has been changed. So you can very easily see if your setting has been changed or not. So as soon as I hit place center, I can click on the screen right where I want the center of my vignette to be. I'm going to do it right about on her nose. And I like that. It's going to be covering that area of her face and not the background. And of course, I would never leave it this way, so I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to add that feather back in. I'm going to bring the amount back up and play with my size a little bit. So now I know exactly what's being lit and what's not being lit. And I could even brighten up the center a little bit if she was in shadow by grabbing the inner light slider at the very bottom. And right now, I've really focused the viewer's eyes on her face and not on this background. And if you wanted to see what it would look like with the vignette on and with the vignette off, all I have to do is toggle this little eyeball. And you can see it does make a difference. And it's nice to be able to switch back and forth. So that's an idea of how you can modify any of the existing presets that are available to you. And you know something? The good thing about all of this is that you can play as much as you want because you can always undo. Now, being able to undo is, of course, a necessity, and you would have expected that. So there is our undo button. It's up here. It's the standard undo keyboard command that you probably would use in writing a document. It's Command Z or Command Z on a Mac and Control Z or Control Z on Windows. But this is what I really wanted to show you that I think is awesome, and it's unique within Luminar. That is your history panel. When you're working in Luminar, it records every single filter you apply, every single slider you adjust, even every time you might turn on and off a filter, or we'll learn about this shortly, a layer. So I can go back and see exactly how I got to this point if I wanted to recreate it, or if I messed up, I could jump back to any point along the way because I love how blue this is going to be. Now, if I wanted to, I could go back and say, okay, I want to go back to before I did that, and I can go to any point along my historical timeline. And if I don't want to change anything, I can go right back up, back to where I finished, not where I started. So that's kind of a nice feature. And if you save your document we're going to talk about saving at the very end, but if you save your project file, this history is saved on a Mac, and very shortly it will be also saved when you save your Windows version. But it's really nice because you can go back 2 weeks later, 2 months later, and look at an image and adjust it and tweak it again because it's all live. And even on Windows now, even though you don't get this full history, when you open up a Luminar project file, all of your sliders are still in place and they can still be adjusted. So they're still live, and that's a great feature because you don't have to go back and reinvent the wheel. You can go back and look at the wheel and tweak it exactly how you want it to look. So the last thing I wanted to talk about with presets is, okay, you made this great preset that you like, right? And let me bring my vignette back. And I want to save this because I shot 20 images of her in this exact same location with different expressions. So all I need to do to save this filter preset is go down to the bottom right-hand corner. I can click on that, and it tells me or asks me what name I'd like to give it. So I'm going to call this Olivia by the water. I'll just go Olivia Water and create that as a new preset. And when you create a new preset, in the categories pop-up where we saw the original presets as well as the ones you can download, there is a section called User Presets. And that's where all of the presets that you create are stored. So if I look under here, I have a bunch of ones, and I'm going to go ahead and scroll to the right and look for the letter O. There we go. We have Olivia Single Fix. I guess I had done that yesterday. So there's all these different ones that I created that I can just use over and over again. So maybe I had this retro look that I like. There we go. I can go ahead and apply that. I go, I'm crazy. I don't like that. Go to my tools menu. Go to my history menu and step back one. So that's an idea how you can use presets and a hint of how you can start adjusting images with your filters and sliders. Now, what I'd like to do is actually start developing this image from scratch, tell you what I'm thinking and why I'm doing what I'm doing, and walk you through how I use the application. So let me go ahead, and if I wanted to, I can reset this. I can click on History. If I don't want to go all the way down to the bottom, there's a little reset button right there. Click on that. Clears all of my filters. This is my original image that I brought in. And now I'm ready to start developing this picture. I'm going to just take a quick look just to see if there's any critical questions that are listed here.
Hey, Abba, could you show how you toggle on and off the presets to show at the top there?
How do I? Okay, so yes, thank you very much, Laurie. So the nice thing about the Luminar interface is you can really take advantage of all the real estate that you can on your monitor. If you look in the upper right-hand corner, you see there's two buttons, and they're orange, which means they're activated. The one on the left is your preset panel, and if I click on that to turn it off, it will hide the presets. And as a matter of fact, since I'm not using them for this part of the demo, I would turn them off. So I can turn them on and off that way. So if you're not seeing your presets, make sure that they're activated, that little button is orange. And to the right of that is the other pane that we're working, which is the filters pane. And I can turn that on and off. So there might be an instance where I have a developed image and I just want to try out a bunch of different looks on it. I want to see what kind of cool things I can do with it. I don't need to see what's on the right side. So you can adjust the interface so it's perfect for your needs at that point in time. So that's one of the cool things. Does that address the question, Laurie?
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. So let's have some fun and process this image. So the first thing I like to do when I develop any image is I will put on under the essential section of my filters a develop filter. And the develop filter will allow me to adjust the things that you would expect. I can do exposure to make things brighter and darker, increase and decrease contrast, change color temperature, work with just some smaller areas like the highlights and the shadows and whatnot. This is kind of your standard go-to filter. For those of you who use or shoot RAW in your cameras, instead of saying develop, it'll say RAW develop. And it has a great amount of latitude to recover what you might think are lost highlights or details in your shadows that are crushed because it was an underexposed image. So those are the first areas that I would go to. And I look at this image and I think it's pretty good, but maybe I want to bring up the shadows a little bit. And one of the things I like to tell folks as they're playing with a new application, especially one with sliders, is grab a slider and move it all the way to either side. You're not going to break anything, but it'll give you an idea of really what that slider does. I mean, I think exposure is pretty self-evident, brighter and darker. But what really does contrast do? So if I take contrast and I drag it all the way to the right, you can see that basically it takes and it crushes my darker areas and opens up the brighter areas and gives me a whole different feel versus low contrast where there's no punch, there's no oomph to it. And with contrast, usually a little goes a long way. If you ever want to reset a single slider, just double click on it and it will reset to a neutral point, in this case, 0. So I could go ahead and I could work with this image like this. I like it. I might add a little bit of clarity. And what clarity does is it actually works with the contrast of the colors in the midtones and makes the image pop a little bit more. So I do like the feel of this. It's very subtle, before and after. And that's great. But I do want to fix the color balance. It feels a little bit blue to me because of the time of day and the filter that was on the camera. So I can go over here into temperature, and if I want, I can simply slide it a little bit away from the blue, and it's going to warm up the image. So I'm getting closer to that golden hour that I really wanted to get the feel for. So I kind of like that. That's a nice initial developing on my image. Now at this point, I often try the Accent AI filter. And again, as I indicated earlier, I'm going to click on that to apply it. The Accent AI filter is a single slider, but what this single slider can do is it can actually look at what would be the best contrast, where are skin tones so I don't sharpen them, what can I sharpen, is there areas that are too dark? It'll recognize foliage, fixing the color of that. It'll recognize sky. So with one slider, it will fix a lot of the nuances and sometimes just make that image exactly where I want it to be. So you notice that's nothing with the AI, but you can always overdo it. I think that makes it pop a little bit too much. It's a little too hard. But I'll tell you, a little AI filter goes a long way. And if I wanted to, I could say this is basically done. I want to look at the before and after. And you can really see the difference here. You know, at first I bet you're saying, well, it doesn't look that blue. But once you get that golden hour here, you can really see the difference between these two selections. And if I wanted to go ahead and turn off the Accent AI filter, you can see what it does. And it just really kind of brings up, makes this image pop. So I'm very happy with what I've done. And I want to start playing with some other elements of the interface and play with some other maybe presets or some of the other filters, but I don't want to mess up what I've already done. So what I can do is create a new layer called an adjustment layer, and I can apply these changes to a separate element, and that way I won't mess up anything on the layer below. So to create a new layer, in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, you'll see a little plus sign. And if you click on that plus sign, you'll get a drop-down window, a little drop-down area, and it says add new adjustment layer. And that's what we're going to do. I'm going to just point out there's also add a new image layer. So you can actually bring in another photograph and with masking, blend those images together. And we also, for those who are used to using blending modes are available for every filter and every layer. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go back to some of the basics. We're going to just add a new layer, and we're going to start working on this image. So I click add a new layer. Oh, I did add a new image. Okay, in my enthusiasm, there we go. Add a new adjustment layer. And you'll notice it now adds a layer, and this layer is just safely put underneath the one that we did the work on. It's not gone. If we click on that, we would see all of the filters that we applied, but we want to work on the adjustment layer. So at this point, I could apply, since it's cleaned up, a preset and stop there, but I want to do some real nuanced repair to this. Now, we're pretty lucky here. I was pretty lucky. This model has pretty good skin, but maybe I want to soften it just a little bit to fix some of these little issues here. So what I can do is I can use some of the other filters to soften or create this look. So for instance, there's a filter called structure, and I'm going to click and apply that. Now structure, most people think, is you actually add what feels like sharpening. So if I move that to the right, do you see how, intense everything becomes? Nobody would want to look like this. But if you're shooting architecture, are you shooting mountains? Are you shooting something you want to give a really kind of a cool feel to, like maybe a car? Cranking up the structure could give your image a really cool vibe. But it doesn't work here. What does work is that I can also move that structure all the way to the left, and now it acts as a softening agent to my image. Now again, you can always do too much of a good thing, and this is way too soft. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually bring that softness down, and sometimes I like to zoom into 100% just to see really what's going on. So I'm going to go to the drop down 100%, and now look at the skin, and I'm going to just bring this down a little bit just so I see a little bit of softening. And I think that's good. And again, go ahead and turn things on and off. So that's without, that's with it. We have some nice softening. Maybe I'll give it a little bit more. But I only want to soften her skin. I want the eyes to be sharp, and I want the lips to be sharp. And that's where masking comes in. So here I can apply a filter, and then using something called masking, I can choose whether that filter is applied to part of the image, or I can even erase it from part of the image. So to apply a mask, I'm going to go over to where it says structure, and there's a little brush. And when I click on that brush, it'll turn orange as soon as I choose how do I want to paint my filter on. And we'll use the brush in a moment, but you could also do a radial mask, which is like a circle. So maybe you put on a filter where you blur everything, and then you just want it only to be blurry on the edges. Or a gradient mask. Maybe you want to replace a sky. So instead of having to brush it in, it's a nice even level, so you can use a gradient mask. I'm going to go ahead and go back to the brush because we're working on skin. And as soon as I click that, you see it has become orange. I can choose if I want to paint in my filter or erase what I've done. And I can find that in the upper left-hand corner of the interface. You see right now it says paint. So that means if I stroke with my brush, I'm going to paint in softness. If I clicked on erase, I might want to go do the hair to remove softness. So again, either way I can work things. I'm going to stick with paint, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit. You can do that with the keyboard. I'm going to do Command plus, zooms me in a little bit, Control plus on a Windows machine. And I can just start painting. Now watch what happens as soon as I do my first brush stroke. You'll notice that the sharpness has come back everywhere in her face. So it's only going to apply the softness where I am painting over with this brush. Let me go ahead and slide over a little bit. I'm just holding down the space bar. And if I hold down the space bar once I'm zoomed in, it turns into that little hand, and I can move anywhere around the image that I want to move. So I'm going to go ahead and I can paint this in, and I want to just show you, you can probably see it's getting softer. Now I know some of you are watching on smaller screens and smaller devices, and also in real life you want to see exactly where you painted and where you missed. So once you start doing this, in the upper left-hand corner of the interface, there's another eyeball, and if you click on that eyeball, you get this red overlay. And what that red overlay shows you is exactly where the filter's being applied. So I can see I really hit the key points here. I hit her face and her forehead. I'll probably want to soften the skin a little bit and maybe the shoulder. Now I want to point out that if you look at the top of the screen right above her head, I can also control the size, softness, and opacity of this brush. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and bring the opacity down to say 50%, and I'll make my brush smaller. Now, again, for the folks out there who might be using Photoshop or Lightroom, same keyboard shortcuts that you know to make a brush bigger and smaller, the left and right bracket keys. You can do that. And if you hold Shift left bracket or Shift right bracket, it will actually make your brush softer or harder. So this is a softer. I made it about 73% opacity, and then I can go ahead and just brush it in just to get some softness here. And if I overshoot, that means I can click Erase, and maybe I'll go just tweak up the cheek a little bit. And as soon as I turn off the little overlay, I can see exactly where I've softened, and I can go ahead and play with this slider. And really, again, if I wanted to, I can, this is where I go to the extreme. Doesn't look as bad because only the skin is being extremely softened. So whereas when I pushed it without the filter or without the mask, everything looked horrible. Here I can really push it, and depending on her complexion, I could really bring out, some nice clear skin. So that would be one of the first steps I might do when processing a portrait. Now, I want to point out that you can use structure, or you can use any filter other than the develop filter more than one time on a layer. And of course, you can have many layers. So here I went ahead and I softened her skin, but I can grab structure again. And in this case, and I'm going to zoom out just a little bit with my mouse, I really want the hair to be defined and the eyes to be defined. So in this case, I'm going to add structure. Okay. And I want it to be in other parts of the image. I want to just paint it in, say, on her hair. So once again, I switch over to my brush, and I don't want to erase, I want to paint in. And I can go ahead and I can start painting over the hair, so I'm starting to get more detail in the hair, and I can even zoom in and sharpen up the eyes. So I'm using the same filter and using a mask to do different things. So there's the sharper eyes, and you see it's subtle, and the key is to be subtle, but I can bring that up. And there is our sharper eyes and hair, but a nice soft skin. And if I wanted to look at this entire layer with it turned off, just like I can with any filter, layers also have a little eyeball that you can click and just turn off the effect of that one layer. So I can turn that off, and you notice the skin is a little rougher and the eyes aren't as sharp. And then I can click it back on and see the difference. And once again, I could always go ahead and do a side-by-side to see where I've come from and where I am. So now we've kind of fixed the skin, and we've fixed the eyes, and we've used only a few of the filters available at this point. But I want to go ahead and tweak this a little bit more. I want to maybe make sure that there's no real color cast here. So let me go ahead, and I'm going to hit Command 0 or Control 0. That just shrinks my image down so I can see the whole image in my screen if I've zoomed in. It's a nice little keyboard shortcut. That was, once again, was Command or Control 0. And now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say Remove Color Cast. So here's the Remove Color Cast. It's under my Issue Fixer. And my eyeball says, yeah, I think I fixed it from the blue, but let's see what happens if the artificial intelligence can make it a little bit better. So I'm going to slide it a little bit to the right. And I think it did a little bit of a fix there. Let's go ahead, and I'm going to turn that off. So you see it brought it down. It made it a little less gold. I think it's a little more neutral. And we're good to go. And now I just want to tweak the image. We're getting really close to my final image. I like the way it looks. I want to do a couple things. There's a great little slider called Tone, and it has one slider within Tone is like one of my secret weapons when I'm working on fixing a picture. I'm going to go ahead and double click on that and apply Tone to the image. So Tone has all of the same controls that you may have seen earlier on in the Develop module. So you can, bring up your shadows. So if I wanted to, I could open up the shadows so that we her face is brighter, or if the sky was too bright, I could bring down the highlights, and I could work with all of that. But there's this great little slider here called Smart Tone. And what Smart Tone does is if you move it to the left, it will bring down the highlights, the brighter areas, without compressing the shadows. So I can actually recover highlights without losing any details in my shadows, which is really nice. And I actually like what that does. It, again, draws our eyes back to her. If I move it to the right, I'm going to go ahead and reset it to 0 by double-clicking on it. If I move it to the right, it will open up my shadows and really open up her face without blowing out the highlights behind her. So this little slider here is pretty powerful. As a matter of fact, my 1-2 punch often is the accent AI filter, followed by the tone filter, and a lot of times I'm ready to go. So I like this, and I'm ready to do a couple of things. I think the image looks good, but I want to do a little bit of repair. I want to go ahead and maybe remove this little bit of shadow, or I should say highlight under her eye. I think it's distracting from my image. And I think this black blob here is also bothering me. It's like, what is that? So I'm ready to go ahead and use one of the two tools that are very useful to this. And we have a tool called the Clone and Stamp tool. And that allows me to copy pixels from one area of the image and basically paint them onto another area. And then there's the Erase tool, where I can literally paint over a section and it looks at the pixels surrounding it and using artificial intelligence erases that item, which is great if you have people in the background or you might have a sign that you want to remove. Very easy to use both of these tools. So I'm going to go ahead and use the Clone and Stamp tool. I'll drop that down, choose Clone and Stamp. It's going to go ahead and prepare the image and get ready for me to do this. And what it does is it actually creates its own new layer. You'll see when we are done with this that there'll be a separate layer for Clone and Stamp. And now you'll see it says click to set the source. So what it's doing is it's asking me what area do I want to reference when I paint over something. So let's say I want to get rid of this black area. I'm going to click on this little green-white area here. And now it's going to use that. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you guys can see better what's going on. So it's going to use this area here. And when I paint over it, I can change that. If I don't like it, I can hit undo. I can always have the go back. There we can do that. So I kind of liked it, but I want the water to be even. So maybe I'll go over here. If I hold down the Option key or the Alt key, I can click on a new area. And now I'm painting over from a different area. And it's just easy enough to exactly get rid of that one little point I wanted to. So that's an idea of how the Clone and Stamp works on a background. How would I use it on her eye? Well, I'm going to zoom in and scroll over right to this little spot here where I just want it to be a little bit darker. So I have a couple of ways that I will attack this. First of all, I can control the size and softness of my brush as we talked about before, but often when I'm doing cloning and stamping, I like to reduce the opacity to say about anywhere between 25 and 50%, because this allows me to gradually paint in new areas. And I can also select different source areas to really get that blending happening. So I'm going to hold down the Option key or the Alt key, Windows or Mac, click on this darker area part of the eyeball, darker area under her eye, and just gently kind of hold down the Option and just paint in these areas. And slowly fill in that lighter area this cloned information. And I can turn that on and off. There you can see I've actually succeeded in doing stuff. I'm going to go ahead and zoom back. And sometimes I'll zoom back and I would tweak this probably a little better, but I could go in and just maybe soften this a little bit and go ahead and remove any problems. It's another great way that you can also remove, if there's a blemish, you can blend it in. So like right down here, I could blend in on the skin, make it nice and big, nice and soft, and just start lightening and working with the shadows there. So as you can see, always better to sometimes work from a distance so you can see exactly what you're fixing. So that's how you can use this tool. You can always see the before and after, what I've done here. And then when you're finished, you just click on Done, and it will return you back to the main interface. The last thing I'm going to do before I show you how to save this, and then we'll go to some questions, is I'm going to show you the cropping tool. So the cropping tool is located in the same place that we found the erase tool and the clone and stamp tool. This cropping tool, keyboard shortcut C. And when I click on that, I can see the bounding box of what I want to crop. And the first option you have is basically to free crop. I can go ahead and say, you know, I just kind of want to get that nice rule of thirds here. I want our eyeball to be right there in that corner. I can go ahead and kind of position that, get the feel I want. But the other nice thing I can do with the crop tool is I can go over to the upper left-hand side, and there's an area that says aspect, and right now it says free. But if I click on that, I can choose a specific aspect ratio for my crop. So if I had to deliver, say, 8x10s to somebody, I can go ahead and say, you know what? I'm going to use this 4x5. 4x5 is just the ratio of 8x10 if we double each. So 4x5 is 8x10. It's also 16x20. So these are all pretty standard. So I can click on that and I can say, okay, that's the framing I need if it's going to fit in an 8x10 frame. And that's a very nice feature. Now this is all non-destructive. So I could do one 8x10 version and export it, and then I could go back and change it to say, oh yeah, I want to put it on my Facebook feed. Now it's the exact same, or the exact right aspect ratio for your Facebook feed. Now it probably won't work well on this image, but if I wanted to turn this into a Facebook banner, I can click on cover, and now I know exactly how this image can be framed if I'm going to put it on my Facebook page. And I think that's really cool. If I go ahead and I hit done, you'll see it's now perfectly sized for Facebook. Let me go back into my crop. And by the way, I know there's at least one of you out there that's going, but her face is going to be blocked. Well, not only can you do that, feed, but I can also flip the direction. So now we can have the little picture here. But I'm going to go back to square because I'm going to put this on Instagram. So we'll do a square aspect ratio. We're going to go ahead and flip it back, and I can stretch it out. And if you get all messed up, you can always hit that reset button. But we're pretty quick here. There we have our image. I'm going to hit done. And our cropping is there. And I want to show you how to save. But before we do that, let's take a peek at where it was. So that was our image and we liked it. This is our image now and it really pops. And I really didn't do that many changes to this image. I want to just kind of quickly show you them again, and then I'll show you how to save it. So you can see we kind of did this pretty quick if I wasn't actually instructing and showing you the details. I just put on a develop filter, made the picture look good, dealt with brightness and shadows and highlights, threw on that accent AI filter. So now I had a basic developing. You can see I then threw on an adjustment layer. And here I did structure for both the face. I did negative structure to soften the skin and used another structure filter to sharpen the hair and the eyes. I removed the color cast, tweaked that toning to bring down that highlight. So that worked out real well. And then I just put on a new layer and I did my cloning, and you can see some areas disappeared. So this area got fixed and this area got fixed. So I'm pretty happy with that, and I'm ready to save it and to export it. If you go up under File and you hit Save or Save As, it will save a Luminar project file. And actually I want to show you what that looks like. So if I go to my desktop here, we have all of our pictures. I'm going to step back, I think, one layer. So if you can see this, and I'm going to make this bigger for everybody. When you save something as a Luminar project file, you'll see this icon. And what it saves is a copy of the original image inside the project file and all of your adjustments. So when I double click to open this back up in Luminar, all of my sliders will be exactly the way I set them, and I can tweak the image. So I haven't locked it in. It's not a flattened image. And that's an important thing to work with. So that's what saving that image would be. The other way you can save it, and the other way that you want to save it, is to go ahead, and you can get to this from two locations. In the upper right-hand corner, you can go Share Image, and you can see there's Export to Image. You can also get Share under File, and you can say Share To. I like working in the upper right-hand corner. I'm a very visual person. So I can export an image, and here is where I can send my picture and make it a JPEG or a TIFF, or I'll show you a bunch of flavors. But before I do that, I also want to point out that you can also export your image directly to many of the social media locations that you might use. I could go ahead and I could export this directly to Facebook or directly to Twitter, which is really nice. If I have other applications in my computer, such as Photoshop or Lightroom, Luminar plays well with others. It's a standalone application, but you can also use it as a plugin for Photoshop and Lightroom, and you can also do all the work here, and if there's something you need to do in Photoshop or Lightroom, you can send it there, as well as to any other application that follows that standard Adobe protocol for plugins. So it's really nice. It's a very flexible application. But I'm going to export an image, and I'll get this dialog box. Let's just go ahead and focus on that. And as you can see, I can output some sharpening. So a lot of times when you're putting something out for a screen, you want to add a little sharpening to it. So you have 3 different levels to play with. You can do a resize if you want. So right now it's going to be its original size, but if I wanted to, I could say, you know what, I want everything to be with the long edge of 2000 pixels because I'm sending it off to a client, or I don't want huge files. I can choose the color space, which is nice if I'm sending it out to printing. And I can choose the format. Now, if it's JPEG, you can control the quality with this slider. So it can be more or less compressed, which means a bigger or smaller file. And if it's more compressed, you're going to lose some quality. And I can also choose all of these other formats. So for instance, if I'm working with an image and I want to export it as a TIFF file, I can choose that. And you'll notice I now have a new option because TIFFs can hold more color information than a JPEG. So I can export this with 8-bit color or 16-bit color, which means it has a lot more millions and millions, or billions and billions, basically. It's 16 bits is 16 raised to the second. So it's 2 times 2, so it's 4 times 2 is 8 times 2 is 16. We can keep going, but 2 to the 16 for each of the colors, R, G, and B. So it's a lot of colors if you need to save it that way. And as you can see, you can also save it with the extension if you want it to be a Photoshop document or a PDF. Very easy to do, and you can go ahead and hit save, and you're good to go. So let me save this document. I have one. I don't want to replace it. Yeah, I probably could, but we'll call it number 1, and hit save. And now we are good to go to answer some questions. Laurie, back to you.
Okay. Ty is asking, does it make sense to save the work from time to time?
Yes. Yes, that's a great question, Ty. As a matter of fact, though I showed you saving at the very end, I will often do Command or Control S from the very beginning, or to the drop down. And then as I'm editing, when I make something I like, I always hit Command or Control S. I can honestly say that, you know, I use this application pretty much, I would say 24/7, but it's not quite that much. I dream about it a little bit. But as for having crash problems, they are very few and far between. The one recommendation, if you are working on files, is we have a tendency to forget to close the previous image we're working on. And I've had folks that, you know, they're done with an image, they export it, and then they open up a new image, and the old image is still open, and then 5 or 6 images later, they're wondering why their machine is slowing down, and that's because the computer and the CPU and the graphics card are still being used up by all 6 of those images. and all the filters. So it's a good idea that once you're done, if you remember, is to just remember to close a window of any images that you're done with. And that way you'll make sure you won't run out of computer memory.
Okay, great. Well, there's been several questions about where to find the keyboard shortcuts. So I think what I'll do at this point, Abba, if it's okay, I'm going to take over the screen and I'll show everyone where they can find some more resources. And so you should see the Luminar, actually the Skylum.com website up on your screen right now. And what I'd recommend doing if you want to find more videos and tutorials, etc., there's a menu here over to the left-hand side. And if you click on this, you can go ahead and access quite a bit of information here. One of the things you might want to do is sign up for an account. This will give you the ability to receive a monthly newsletter from us. So we'll be able to update you with webinars that are coming up, some new updates or upgrades, or things that are happening, events that we might be at. So that's probably one of the first things I would do. Now, I'm going to go ahead and scroll through a few of these things so that you can see one of those things is this Luminar Marketplace. So in here, this is where you're going to be able to download some free and paid presets. So Abba showed you a bunch of presets that were installed with Luminar, but you can also access quite a few different ones from some of our content creators, including Abba himself. We also have lookup tables, a little bit more advanced feature that you can find on some of the video tutorials, which I'll show you shortly. You can download some textures and workspaces. So you might want to check out the marketplace for some freebies there. One of the things I'd really highly recommend, especially for those of you who are just starting out with Luminar, is taking a look at our user guide. Rich Harrington put this together. Really great, very thorough for both Mac and for Windows. Everything you ever wanted to know about Luminar and more is available here. I would recommend scrolling down to the bottom here, though, and downloading the actual PDF file format. It makes searching a little bit easier. So, for instance, I know some of you folks had questions that I actually grabbed from the user guide. I was able to show you some links of where to find things. You could just search for that. Now, as far as keyboard shortcuts, quite a few of you were interested in finding a little bit more about those. So under Mac, I just looked up keyboard shortcuts, and here's a list of those keyboard shortcuts that are available to you. There's also tooltips. If you're in Luminar and you hover over, let's say, a button or a tool, you'll see the keyboard shortcut that's available there as well. Now, if I go over to Windows, same thing. You should have the same listing over here, and then keyboard shortcuts for Windows are available as well. Okay. So for user guides, now if you want to see some more video tutorials, we've got our whole video gallery here that's really broken up into different categories, or you can view all of them. There's some of you folks are on Windows machines, PCs versus Mac, so here's some quick start guides. But we also have what we call fast knowledge, which are maybe 3-minute videos on something that you might be interested in. So for instance, if you want to learn more about blending modes, you can learn more about that from Nicole Young, or you might want to get some inspiration. So we've got a bunch of webinars here. I'm sorry, not webinars, but videos, core skills, problem solving, including webinars. So we'll have a bunch here as well. We're always adding to this, so be sure to come back to view some new videos. And we like to place a little new icon here so you can see what's new there as well. Okay, now I'm going to just jump over here to webinars and events. This is where we are going to be posting some upcoming webinars. So for those of you who know Joel Grimes, who is one of the most well-loved, well-known photographers alive today, Joel Grimes is going to be with us next couple weeks, and he's one of our Skylum ambassadors as well. And we've got infrared, so if you folks are interested in infrared, Laurie Klein, who is the master of infrared, will be demonstrating that as well. And we've got some wildlife coming up. So we're always adding to this page as well. And then at the bottom, you can see some past events. And just make note, we are actually going to be updating our education pages. So a few of these things might be moved around, but this kind of gives you a general idea of where you can find some more information. Okay, Abba, do you have any last words for everyone?
Have fun. My favorite thing about Luminar is that it's really easy to play with your images and play with those sliders and make some magic. And I want to thank everybody for taking the time to join our webinar today.
Yes, thanks everyone. Thanks, Abba, for a great presentation.